So the Viking GM was talking about whether or not to sign or not to sign Justin Jefferson, whether to keep him a part of the Minnesota football team. He said the decision going forward is easy. Quote, trading him is not something that has once crossed my mind. Adolfo Mensa said, the Viking GM there. He told reporters at the scouting combine. So that is what we call, kids, the money quote. That's the money quote, right? That's going to drive the monologue. So let us discuss the question on this one. The Vikings GM, as we just laid out here, saying that he has not considered trading Justin Jefferson at all. Do you believe him? Right? Do you believe him? That's a very simple question. Very simple question. So I have AccuWeather, Google, and insider trading. And we will combine all of these things together, and we are going to make a tuxedo, which is what Justin Jefferson is going to be wearing once he gets the Mega Millions. The Mega Millions, the Powerball. So, I look at this, and to answer the question, I'm a little cross-eyed on this one, right? I'm a little cross-eyed on it because it's impossible, if your job is to look at all of the possibilities, to not have one of the possibilities being a trade, right? I don't buy that the Viking GM has never considered the possibility of having to trade Jefferson. I don't believe him. I don't, right? It's a pot on the stove. Now, maybe it's on the back burner. It's a big stove, and you got a lot of pots, and maybe it's on the back burner. It's not on the front burner, but it's still a pot on the stove. It's still there. Despite that, right, you feel one way, and that's the thing about the comments about, I feel like I haven't even thought about this, possibility of trading Justin Jefferson. I always look at that cross-eyed. I always do. When I see somebody say, well, here's why my feeling on this, because you look at feelings, and they change, right? Your feelings about things change. It's like the AccuWeather forecast. You look at the forecast. When you base things off your feelings, it's kind of like looking at the weather. Very similar to looking at the weather, right? I mean, you look at the weather, you don't have a lot of control over the weather. They tell you what the weather's supposed to be. They say, well, like a 40% chance of rain, sometimes less than that. But you do the whole weather thing. And sometimes you can predict the weather. And you're right, and people predict the weather, right? But generally, they're pretty right on, and there are things, though, that you look at. Weather's fickle and feelings are fickle. Like, I feel we're not. Plus, these guys all lie. More on that in a second. But the Vikings, if you look at the franchise charter, the Vikings have a history of not wanting to break the bank and open up the rainy day fund for these receivers. You go back and you look at Randy Moss, straight cash homie, who ended up going to the this is so long ago, there was a team in Oakland. There was an NFL team that they played in Oakland. They were called the Raiders. That's how long ago that was. And he has Stephon Diggs a couple years back, who powdered his way out of Minnesota and ended up in Buffalo. Now he's pouting. Don't tell the Bills Mafia. They get upset if you point out Stephon Diggs is pouting. All right, so stay tuned. The moral of the story is to stay tuned, because the AccuWeather forecast subject to change. Now, headline, speaking of wide receivers and where they will end up, headline from Sin City via Indy, and the status of one Davante Adams. What's going on with Davante? All right, I'm glad you asked. You didn't ask? All right, well, you're going to hear anyway. So the Raiders GM, for some reason, they hired retread Tom Telesco. We have no idea why they hired Tom Telesco. I guess they said, can we hire someone that's been very mediocre but has experience? And they Googled that, and the first name that came up was Tom Telesco. Right, that was it. So they hired him, and he said at the combine, he was asked about the status of Davante Adams. And he says, he's a Raider. 3 words. Now, Telesco, with that, attempting to shut down the possibility of a trade on the horizon, right? So, no, that's not going to happen, right? And that's the move there. So, with that statement being made here, the Raiders GM saying that Davante Adams isn't going to be moved this offseason. That's essentially what he's saying, right? He's implying that. Are you convinced that is the case? Are you convinced that is the case? So I am not. And I would advise you to check your Google Calendar here on your phone. And when you look at the calendar, or the calendar app, maybe you got the Apple app if you have an iPhone, but you have the 4 seasons. And I'm not talking about the hotel or some musical act. You have the 4 seasons, right? You've got spring, you've got the summer, the fall. We're in the winter right now. And this is a bonus season. This is the bonus territory. This is lying season. We're in lying season. Bizarro world. This is bizarre. Every year, it's Bizarro world. Every year, Bizarro world, right? Up is down, right is left, good is bad, wrong is right, white is black, etc. Logical is illogical, and that's how that works. Every single year. In the last decade, I have been behind these microphones at Fox Sports Radio. We had the general manager of the Giants, Gettleman. I remember that. Gettleman. Odell Beckham will not be traded. He's going to be a Giant. They traded his ass to Cleveland. Pete Carroll, a couple years ago at the Combine, was asked about Russell Wilson. He said Russell Wilson's going to be the quarterback of the Seattle Seahawks until he was traded to the Denver Broncos. Remember the Rams. Now, this was in the offseason. The Rams, a couple years ago, Les Snead, the GM, was asked about Jared Goff, and he famously said Jared Goff is, and this is what he said, Jared Goff is a Ram in this moment. So at least he was kind of honest about that, right? He's like somewhat honest about it, but it was still a lie. I mean, technically it wasn't a lie, but he said it. He said it. So yes, Davante Adams is a Raider. That is technically true at this moment. But I think that this story is far from over. And I have this on my big board of stories that we're going to be talking about as a prominent story here, because we'll see how the Jets general manager, Aaron Rodgers, handles this. You look at that Jets front office. You got Aaron Rodgers. You got the advisors there, Joe Rogan, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's also running for president. So those are the senior advisors that's like the blue ribbon panel around Aaron Rodgers. So they're trying to figure this out. Will Davante Adams play hardball? That's really what it comes down to. Does Adams really want to play for the Jets, or does he want to play for the Raiders? We'll find out about that. Does he become an enemy combatant? And if that happens, he can wiggle his way out of Las Vegas. All right, last word here. So headline from, speaking of Vegas, the sports book, the gambling world, according to our friends and a very extreme partner of Fox Sports Radio, the people over at DraftKings, big sponsor here at Fox Sports Radio. So the DraftKings Sportsbook, they have updated the odds, and they have Derrick Henry in a new location. A favorite has emerged, a betting favorite for Derrick Henry of the Tennessee Titans, who's a free agent, and that team is the Miami Dolphins. The Miami Dolphins are a football team. Yeah, they have skyrocketed, according to the numbers on DraftKings. They first opened at plus 7,500, and now they are at plus 1,000. Plus 1,000. So the Dolphins, now the betting favorite to land Derrick Henry. Is this based in any reality? Is that based in any reality? So, at first glance, I spent several seconds looking at the landscape. At first glance, the answer is no. Right? You look at the Dolphins, you're like, well, they seem to be pretty good at running back. They've got Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane. That seems like it's pretty good, right? And those guys were balling all season for Miami. Mostert was a touchdown fiend in short yardage situations, and Achane ran wild. Remember that game against the Broncos in particular. He did get hurt. So you look at the depth chart. Despite that, I still maintain that the Dolphins, I buy that they are at least window shopping. And the other thing I always factor into this, when you talk about the gambling market, the gambling market is about as dependable an indicator as you can have in terms of what's coming up next, the coming attractions, if you will. And the reason why is rather obvious. They have skin in the game. And they hear things, they see things. It's like insider trading. They want to limit liability, and so they talk to people, and they know things that we don't know. They have access to stuff that's not public, material information that a lot of these deals are done weeks and months in advance, and they're announced after lawyers vet the contracts and all that. So factor that in.